Thank you very much.
Math don't subtract, but content like I had enough. Long hair don't care, Samoan plus I'm tatted up. I know this blow your mind, and I ain't blowing pine. Not talking women looking skimpy every other line. Yeah, I got a dime, about to make a mine. Life in Christ got me finished like across the line. With the way that you telling me to do it, sell out to sell out. Nah, man, it's so foolish. Done trying to beat you, it don't fit, misfit. I don't trip, everybody hate Chris. They saying get with this, just like a membership. They talking slick that this is it, but it's just gibberish. I say I'm interested, they say you different. How you gon' know, even if you don't let us in? They don't know about us, they don't know about us. They don't know about us, they don't know about us. They don't know about us, they think we dumb, diddy dumb. But they gon' know about us. They gon' know about us. Hey, they gon' know about us. They gon' know about us. Oh, they gon' know about us. They gon' know about us. Oh, they gon' know about us. They gon' know about us.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for being here. We also want to say good morning to everyone in the Ratsliff building as well as the Darby building. Welcome. It is Tuesday, another week. It is November. Classes are almost over. We are at the end, folks, of this semester. We do want to give a few shout outs for those of you who participated in homecoming. Thank you so much. If you participated in the theme days, went out to the events, we hope that you guys really enjoyed that. It was a great week, a busy week. We also want to shout out a few of our athletes on the football team. He's probably not in here. He may be in one of our other locations, but Mr. Moses Martillis was named Mid-South Sun Division Defensive Player of the Week and NCCAA National Defensive Player of the Week. Yeah, let's give him a hand. Congratulations to him, as well as Mr. Javon Wilson. He was named NCCAA National Offensive Player of the Week, so let's give him a hand as well. Two great accomplishments for those guys. You know, we do have some things that we want to let you know about tonight. If you guys are looking for some things to do, our men's basketball will be taking on Florida College in the Turner Athletics Center tonight at 7:30. Make sure you guys come out and be a part of that. Ladies, a spiritual growth opportunity for you tonight at 8 o'clock in Holland's Movie Room. Lifelines is taking place, and we have two awesome women who are going to engage in discussion with you. So if you're looking for spiritual growth credit, but also wanting to engage in some awesome conversation, make sure you attend Lifelines. On Wednesday, our First Baptist Church of Lake Wales will be hosting Inroads. If you're interested in having a home-cooked meal, make sure you're there at 8 o'clock. Worship will start at 9. That, too, is worth a spiritual growth credit. And then we have a few activities on Thursday. Our PLRC, they will be hosting an escape room from 6 to 9:30. Grab some friends, and you guys can sign up for that at the front desk in the PLRC. And our men's residents are hosting Lifelines at about 8:15 in the movie room and Williams Hall. We want to make sure you guys come out and be a part of that, and that also is worth a spiritual growth credit. So there are lots of things going on. We do have some things coming up on Friday that we want you to know about. But today we're going to do some things a little bit different. We've been talking to you in our chapel announcements. You've been receiving some text messages about the breakout chapels that are happening. These are being put on by faculty and staff members who want to share some things that are near and dear to their heart, that they have a passion about. And I really want to encourage you, whether you're in this building or you're in the Darby Lecture Hall or the Ratsliff, to really engage in this conversation that's about to take place. This can educate you, but also open your mind to things that are happening not only around the world, but locally. And we can talk about how you can make a difference in some of the things that will be discussed. At this time, for those of you who are in the Ratsliff building in the Darby Lecture Hall, we're going to ask that you, we're going to pause for a minute so that you guys can disconnect your live feed and begin your sessions where you are. We hope you have a great session. And then in a few minutes, we're going to do our introduction in here in the main sanctuary for our guests today, okay? So we're going to take that pause right now. All right, you guys, we are glad that you're here with us. Thank you so much for sitting in the center seats. Today we have two awesome women that are going to be sharing about something that is really important, and I think it needs to be an ongoing conversation forever. Mrs. Kelly Mills and Dr. Lynn Johnson are going to be sharing this morning. Dr. Johnson is a native of Lake Wales, okay? She has been teaching here since 2011. I asked her what is her why for teaching, and she said, one, she was called by God, but two, she has a passion to educate young people and prepare them for their next steps after college. Mrs. Kelly Mills became a faculty member at Warren University in the fall of 2006. She now serves as the Director of General Studies, the Chair of the Humanities Department, and she is an Associate Professor of English. She feels fortunate to be working with students during this pivotal stage in their lives, and it is a privilege to see the transformational work of Christ as they learn about themselves and how they want to influence the world. This is going to be an awesome topic. I will tell you they are going to ask for you to engage a little bit later in this discussion, and so please do that. But let's give these awesome women a hand as they come up to present today.
Good morning. When I was in second grade, I had a birthday party and nobody came. There was maybe one person. And so to look out and see people who chose to come today, we are grateful for that. If you'll indulge us in a moment, I want to open with a Franciscan blessing and to say it as a prayer over us, and then I'm going to introduce a video that we're going to watch. So pray with me. May God bless you with a restless discomfort about easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may seek truth boldly and love deep within your heart. May God bless you with a holy anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may tirelessly work for justice, freedom, and peace among all people. May God bless you with the gift of tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, or the loss of all they cherish, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and transform their pain into joy. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you really can make a difference in this world, so that you are able, with God's grace, to do what others claim cannot be done. We're really grateful. Amen. Sorry. We're really grateful that you're here this morning, and we want to open with a video by a man named Mark Charles. It's a TED Talk, and he actually is a pastor, an activist. He's a Native American of a Navajo tribe. He's running for president on the independent ticket in 2020, but I want you to listen to what he talks about as far as racial conciliation, and he's going to explain that part too. It's about 5, almost 6 minutes, so settle in and really listen to what he says.
You see, white supremacy is a bipartisan value, and we don't know what to do with that. In 2016, Donald Trump won the U.S. presidency by campaigning with a promise to make America great again. Not to be outdone, Hillary Clinton responded and told her supporters that America's great already. In October 2016, in the third presidential debate, she expanded and said, America is great because America is good. And Donald Trump concurred. He said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. See, they both had a broad base of agreement. They both agreed our past, our history, which included the enslavement of African people and the genocide of Native peoples, and our foundations, which are based on the doctrine of discovery and the lie of white supremacy. They both agreed those things were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no and Hillary said yes. See, we were duped. Many of us thought that the 2016 election was about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. What we were actually deciding on as a nation was, did we want Donald Trump to make America explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist again, or did we want Hillary Clinton to work on our behalf to keep our white supremacy and racism implicit? And we didn't know what to do with that. It's easier to call out that candidate, to demonize that Supreme Court nominee, to oppose that particular politician, than it is to deal with our foundations. Why? Because our foundations are what prop up our land titles. See, we would rather believe that the United States of America is racist and sexist and white supremacist in spite of our foundations. But the truth is we are white supremacist, racist, and sexist as a nation because of our foundations, and we don't know what to do with that. African Americans and women will never be included as equal until we deal with the racism and sexism embedded in our foundations. Native Americans, my people, will never be included in We the People until as a nation we deal with the doctrine of discovery and our dehumanizing legal precedent for land titles. There's an Aboriginal leader named George Erasmus, and he says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he says, you have to start by creating a common memory. I think this quote is brilliant, and it gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we don't have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers a history, a mythological history of discovery, expansion, exceptionalism, and opportunities. And we have communities of color that have the lived experience of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow laws, boarding schools, ethnic cleansing, genocide, Indian removal, internment camps, segregation, mass incarceration, and families separated at our borders. We have no common memory, and I think we all can agree that community on a national level is absolutely in the pits. I'm proposing that the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that took place in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony. And I think we need it sooner rather than later. My goal is 2021. Tonight, we are talking about legacy. The Iroquois did not just look 7 generations into the future. They looked 7 generations into their past. They understood that they were a part of a vast transgenerational community. And this is my challenge to you tonight. If we can learn from the wisdom of our indigenous hosts who have been stewarding these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years, if we can acknowledge the vile racism, sexism, colonialism, and white supremacy that our founding fathers embedded deep into our foundations, and if we can pivot, we might just be able to leave a different legacy for our children's, grandchildren's, grandchildren's, grandchildren. A legacy that for the first time, we the people might actually mean all the people. Thank you very much.
That's okay to clap. I appreciate that message too. So we're talking about racial reconciliation. Mark Charles says racial conciliation. We have to work toward making right a relationship that has always been fraught, never been right. And Dr. Johnson and I are going to start with 2 anecdotes. Each of us are going to share one. And then we want to talk about some practical ways that we can reach racial reconciliation. So in my coursework at USF, I took a class called Black Feminist Autocryptography. I was scared to take it by the title, okay? But I chose to take this class, which mixes literature that has literary criticism with autobiography. That's all that term means. And it was the first time in my educational history that I had a class with a black male professor. 2 of the women that I was closest to in my doctoral program, both black women, were in the class with me. And every week we had to, in response to the autocryptographical pieces that we were reading, had to write autocryptographical pieces. It was a very challenging class. And one night, one of the women read her piece, and as she read her piece, she read the N-word instead of saying the word. And our professor badgered her about saying it. And he said, for you to not read it, to not write it, is giving strength to an oppressor, for you to not reclaim that word. And I got angry. I have a bit of a temper, as you can imagine, with this hair, right? So I got angry because I thought that he was treating her badly, and not as if she needed me to stand up for her, But that's what I felt was right in that moment. I had never felt so uncomfortable in a classroom before with this power differential of a professor treating a student like this. And so I said to him, I'm not going to say his name, but I said, "You are baiting her." And that did not go over well, okay? So we had about 6 weeks left of class, and we never met in the classroom again. It was a site that we could not return to because it was so tense. We met at people's apartment complexes, like by the pool. We met at his house one time, but we never met in the classroom again. The same week that this happened, the three of us decided that we were going to have a slumber party. You can laugh at that. We did too.
How old were you at the slumber party?
So I was 30 years old, I'm guessing. I was 30 years old, and I had, my husband at the time was volunteering at a rehabilitation house. They had a very large productive garden, and that week one of the residents brought us bags of spinach. I thought it was spinach. Can you see where I'm going with this? And so Rondrea is vegetarian, and I thought, I'm going to bring her a bag of spinach. She will appreciate this gift. So I get to her house, and upon closer examination, I am bringing my black friend collard greens.
No.
Yep. So I show up to my first slumber party with a non-white friend with a racist gift, okay? And she was skeptical at first, like, what are you thinking? And then she realized it was unintentional and we could laugh about it. But that night, we made vision boards. Mine still hangs in my office. And we had a tough conversation. We debriefed about this terrible classroom experience that we went through that week, and we talked about how painful it is with past. And what that required of me in that moment was to be in intentional proximity with these women, but to also be humble, to be willing to say, I feel guilt, I'm ashamed of a past that has used this word to oppress people. Would I ever say that word? No. Would I ever call somebody that? No. That doesn't matter, because it has been used to degrade African Americans for centuries. And so as a white person, I can claim responsibility for that and say, this stops with me as much as I'm able. So in that small way, we were able to reach some racial reconciliation through our 30-year-old slumber party.
That was a great story. So a few years ago, I was at work, and I received a phone call from my husband, which is not strange. He calls me all the time. So I get this phone call this day, and it was strange because the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, I love you. Okay, great. So it wasn't strange that he was telling me that he loved me. It was strange in the way that he said it, and it was the first thing that came out of his mouth. And then after he said it, he said, I was just held at gunpoint. I'm at work. The police are here. Everything's going to be okay, but I have to call you right back. And I'm at work. All I heard was gun and point and police. That's all I heard. And I was in a panic. I was frantic until he was able to give me a call back. I find out later that my husband was on a route, and he was working, and he was in his delivery truck. He worked for a major delivery company, and he was in this truck, and he was with his supervisor. And they were making a delivery in a town that's really close to here. And so as he pulls to this residence to make this stop to deliver this package, this older white man runs out of his house with a shotgun. And he points this shotgun at my husband. He runs in front of the truck, and he stops in front of the truck. He's pointing this gun through the windshield, and he's pointing it at my husband, and he's saying, I'm going to say the word. He says, you nigger, get off my property. Now, mind you, his supervisor, who was a white man, who was in the passenger seat, he never pointed the gun at him, but he pointed it at my husband, and he told him to get off his property, called him all kinds of names. Not only did he tell him to get off his property, the sad thing was he wouldn't let him leave. So the supervisor is saying, and my husband is afraid, and if any of you have ever seen my husband, he is not a small guy. So he's this big guy, and he's afraid for his life, and he has his hands on the steering wheel, and his supervisor says, let me call the police, and he's telling the guy, we're going to call the police, and this guy says, call the police so that they can arrest him. True story. The police came, and thank God, they arrested the guy that held him at gunpoint. This guy was about 65 years old. He was arrested. He stayed in jail some months behind it. And racism was at my front door that day. My husband almost lost his life because of hatred. He was doing his job. He left that morning, told me he loved me, told his kids that he loved them, went to work. We're all going around like our day is just fine. And he's getting a gun pointed at him because he's black. He dealt with that for a long time. He suffered PTSD behind that. His hatred grew so strong. But because of God and because of this reconciliation that we're going to talk about today is the only thing that got him through that traumatic experience in his life. I don't tell you the story to make you have sympathy for me because this happened some years ago or for my family. I tell you this story because I want you to be aware that the things that happened so many years ago, as we say, because none of you were here during this time when all of this took place. I want you to understand that it's still, the effects of all of that still lingers today in society. And that's why we're talking to you today about this very hard subject.
And we share two stories, but we know that if we had time, you all could tell a story. And so we want to have you be in this contemplative moment with us as we're trying to learn something, even as we're talking. I would encourage you to visit this website called Be the Bridge. The slides that we're going to share, the information that we're going to share, are coming from a woman. You see her picture there, and her name is Latasha Morrison. And so she gives 3 steps, not simple steps, but 3 steps to racial reconciliation. And the first of those is lament. And you may know that word, but lament means a passionate expression of grief or sorrow. I feel it when I say the word lament. I want you to feel it in your chest. And so as what she's saying with lament is that there are some things that we can do to grieve the past. And one of those things is to break down what she calls false historical narratives. We did not, because we're older than you, but we grew up reading the same textbooks that you did. And one of the things that's faulty about textbooks is that every generation only reads its generation of textbooks. And so when new information is discovered in history, we're not privy to it. And so you have to recognize the fact that you have learned wrong facts. You have not learned the whole story. If we're still celebrating Columbus Day,
Preach.
then we are not looking at true historical narratives. Okay? So Columbus did not discover America when you have millions of Native people who are living here then. And we don't hear the truth about numbers of lynchings that happened during Reconstruction and Jim Crow. Okay, so we do not hear the full story. And when you do, The job that you have as a responsible, critical thinker is to lament, is to say, I understand that I have been taught wrong, and what I'm going to do is relearn it. I'm going to readjust and recalibrate my belief system to understand that maybe the way that I was taught something isn't the truth. And the way that you do that is by talking to people. When somebody's telling you their story, you listen. Not defensively, not waiting and saying, well, what about this man? Maybe he was mentally ill. You listen. You listen for the story. But you cannot do that if you are not in proximity and being intentional in your relationships with other people who do not look like you, whether it's race or class or gender. And so you approach those conversations, seeking to change your heart. Do we understand that these are painful experiences and they're uncomfortable? They are. But that is a part of lament, of that painful expression of grief or sorrow, is to say, I am sorry that this happened. And it doesn't matter that you did not inflict that pain directly. Our response is still to say, I'm sorry that this happened, and I feel bad that this happened. Incidentally, Mark Charles, in another podcast, says we need to be in a season of lament. And this really hit me in the gut when I heard it, because we talk about seasons, and sometimes we use that word seasons, and it seems cutesy. I'm in a season of whatever. I'm in a difficult season. It's as if we could change the season that we're in, but God is the one who changes the seasons. We don't get to say, because we wish we would, it's fall finally in Florida. We wish we could do that, right? And that it would actually be cooler and all of that. We can't do that. God is the one who changes the seasons. And so we stay in a season of lament until God brings us out of that.
Yeah. I want to piggyback on that last bullet point there. It says it's painful. Mrs. Mills and I, we understand that you're going to wrestle with this topic. And some of you are sitting in this audience and you're saying, yeah, I don't really know how I feel about this. You might not agree with some of the things that we're going to say or that we've already have said, but we're here to tell you that it's okay. She just explained to you that this is painful for a lot of us. It's painful for me, and I've lived it. Every day I walk out of my house, I was talking to my friend Dr. O earlier, and she was talking about a show that she watches, and the young lady on the show says she's from Africa, and she comes over to the U.S., and she says, well, in Africa, we're all Africans. That's it. But she comes to the U.S. and she finds out that she's actually black. And every time she walks out of her house, she's black because she sees it, because the world is different over here in the U.S., okay? And so the reality is, as God does surgery on our hearts to help us deal with this issue of racial reconciliation, we first have to understand that the reality is racial injustice does exist. It's not a falsity. It does exist. So what's the next step? The next step is confession. We have to confess, as Mrs. Mills has said, we have to say it out loud. No, you might not have been involved. You know, it's almost like when you're in lament, right? You feel this sense of shame maybe, or guilt, or disheartening that you may feel. And that's okay. But most people, when they feel shame or guilt, they're like they're a kid with their hand in a cookie jar. And they get caught, and their mom says, you know what? Who ate the cookies? Not me. Or you like my grandbaby. As soon as you catch her doing something, she comes up to you and gives you a kiss. Because she doesn't want you to think that she did anything wrong. But we have to confess, even if you were not a part of it. Even if you were not a part of it. So the next step is to confess. And it says, Ezra 9, it says, I am too ashamed and disgraced, my God, to lift up my face to you, because our sins are higher than our heads, and our guilt has reached to the heavens. From the days of our ancestors until now, our guilt has been great. The key to that is Ezra wasn't involved in what happened. It was his ancestors. But he felt disgrace because that was a part of his lineage. And so he was in lament for them. He wanted to feel the pain and the suffering that these people were actually feeling from the things that they had done. So we can't deflect. We can't become defensive like Miss Mills says. We can't blame the victim. We can't do any of that. And I'm reminded, as I was doing some studying, I was reminded of 2 Chronicles 7:14. And it says this is a time when God is talking to Solomon, and the people of God, just like always, are not always doing right. So God was telling them, he said in this verse, I'm going to read it to you. It says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. But it tells them that they have to do 4 things, and the first thing is to be humble, to humble themselves. Then they got to pray about it. That's what we're asking you to do today. Seek his face. That means get some understanding of what has taken place. And then turn from your wicked ways once you know. Only until then does God hear us. Only until then will God heal our land. So today I'm encouraging you to confess, even though, just confess the guilt, as it says, and the shame, and acknowledgement will change your heart. I promise you that.
Amen. So the last step, in addition to lament and confession, is reparations. And you probably hear that word and you automatically think a monetary making up for. But we're going to talk about the fact that reparations do not punish, they restore equity. And so we need to talk about equity for a minute, because this is different than equality. Equality assumes that we all need the exact same thing, which isn't true, okay? Equal treatment just erases our differences, and it's not actually fair. So equity is giving somebody what they need to be successful. And Bart told me that he would indulge me in this for a minute. So go ahead and stand up for me. I'm 5'2", and you see that Bart is much taller than I am. And so if the two of us were standing, that's enough. They get the point. They see how tall you are and how short I am. So if the two of us were standing at a 6-foot fence trying to watch a game, that wouldn't be equitable. We don't need the same thing to be able to watch the game, because Bart can easily see over the 6-foot fence, and I would be looking at the wood, right? I would need probably a 2-by-2 foot box to stand on. Does Bart need the box? No. That would be equality, to give everybody the same thing, but we don't all need the same thing. Equity tells us that we're going to give somebody what they need to be successful. And so when we talk about reparations, what we're doing is acknowledging that injustices have taken place, that have torn apart communities, individuals. They've made them less wealthy or less safe, or to have less opportunities. And so we talk about equity as being something that's essential to making reparations. And Dr. Johnson's going to talk to us a little bit more about that.
So when I thought about, okay, how am I going to approach reparations for this audience? Reparations is something that is very complex. Something that this one session is not going to get you to understand it fully. So I wanted to talk about this bill that was recently put before the House of Representatives back in January. It's called the H.R. 40 bill. And what this bill was put forth in this House, in the House of Representatives, is to establish a commission or a group of people that needs to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans, right? So as Mrs. Mills said, first thing people think, oh, we got to cut the check, okay? That's not really all what it's about. And so the bill was for this commission, their role in this was to identify the role of federal and state governments in supporting the institution of slavery. They also had to look at the forms of discrimination in the public and the private sectors against freed slaves and the descendants of slaves, and the lingering negative effects of slavery on living African Americans today in our society. I've already told you the story about my husband and him having to deal with the effects of something that happened many, many years ago. It's not just me, it happens everywhere, right? All the time. And so slavery had this dramatic effect on America that some people wish to just forget about it, like it didn't happen. But what slavery did is it set African Americans on this path that limited their ability to succeed or to enjoy education, to enjoy housing, to enjoy good jobs, to enjoy just the general quality of life. That's what slavery did. And these descendants of the slave owners, they reaped benefits of what had taken place during those years. And so the things that slavery ignited additional things that happened. Mrs. Mills talked about the Jim Crow laws. These were laws that were in place that some of your grandfathers and grandmothers and great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers, that they dealt with these laws. They dealt with laws that enforced slavery, okay? And not only that, redlining. When you have a moment, research some of this stuff, because these things happen. Redlining was a systematic approach to deny people of color of basic services, housing, food, so many things that took place. Dog whistle politics, and I ain't gonna get into that today. That's a conversation for another day. But brutal policing, so many things that was ignited out of what took place all of these years ago. So we can't deny that race is not a problem, because it is a problem, especially in America. But we want you to understand that if we acknowledge these things, acknowledge what was taken from communities, these things that left them with less wealth and not safe communities, not enough opportunities to allow people to be successful. If we ignore them, then the cycle continues to go on and go on and go on. When you get time, research Tulsa, Oklahoma, what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. Where a whole town was decimated. Towns where black people had their own banks, their own stores. They had their own community. And people came in and they destroyed it and they killed people. All because they were black. I am so glad we have come as far as we have come. I thank God that I'm able to sit in front of this audience of so many diverse people from different backgrounds, and we could say that I love you and that you love me. I'm so grateful for that, but we can't forget what has already taken place. That's why we have to lament. That's why we have to confess. Will reparations make it right? Mm-mm. It won't. But is it a start in the right direction? It is, because how are you going to give equality? How can equality happen, equity happen, if things don't change? If you don't make a way for reparations? Let me stop before I go really preaching here.
No, it's good. It's good. Audre Lorde, a celebrated author, says, "It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." And so we want to open the floor for some questions and maybe answers. We are definitely not experts, but we'll attempt to give some answers if there's something from the floor that you wanted to ask.
Hello, everyone. So, I work as a youth minister at a basically all-white church. Hey, Allie. I used to go to my church sometimes. And so we have a lot of conversations about, like racial, like just stuff all the time, because my church is a cool church. They're cool people. But I came across a conversation one time when someone said that black people have already received reparations. So I'm not sure about the whole, like my girlfriend knows all about this, like with sharecropping and stuff. So I don't want to explain it, but do you kind of know what happened at that time?
Sharecroppers were still denied voting rights in the 60s. You had people who were going during Freedom Summer to Mississippi to interview sharecroppers who were having their land still taken from them and still not able to not vote, not own land. So when you're talking about that particular piece in history, no, reparations still haven't happened. When you have a community like Grove Manor, right here in Lake Wales, where people do not have resources, we know that reparations have not happened.
You're my friend. Ditto to what she just said. It has not happened. Any other questions? Simpler questions, please.
Well, good morning, everybody. I have a question. I was wondering, do you think racism today is more like systematically driven or like kind of media driven?
That's deep. That's deep. From my limited knowledge, I would definitely say that racism is more systematic to me. Not to say that media doesn't play a role in racism. That's not what I'm saying. But whether people want to believe it or not, and I teach HR, okay, and HR deals with the hiring and the firing. I'm just going to use that as an example, right? The hiring of people. And even though we can go into a hiring process and we could say that we're not going to be biased, or we can say that we're not going to discriminate because of color or race or whatever it might be, I'm here to tell you that it still does happen. It happens more probably regular than you would actually think that it happens. We are still today trying to get rid of laws. You know, there's this one, and I don't know it per se. I'm sure our history professor is probably thinking, oh my God, they don't know what they're talking about. But I know that there is somewhere in like this I don't think it's a law or something like, I don't know exactly, but basically we were not considered even humans at one point. And I believe it's still on the books today. Hasn't totally been, yeah, we say we're more humane today, but there's some things that are systematically still in place, I believe.
Can I just say with that, Charles, I think that the systematic racism is obviously still in place. But when you're talking about racism in the media, this is where you can step into reparations and you can change the narrative in your own home and in your sphere of influence. So I have a almost 4-year-old daughter. When I'm going to buy her something, we don't just buy her books with white characters. We don't just buy her white baby dolls, because that feeds into the you can only be friends with people who look like you. That's silly. And that is one step that we can do. So I try to help my students understand that anytime you're viewing media, there is a narrative and a script that's being fed to you, and it is your job as a critical thinker to break that down. So if it's an Oreo cookie commercial with Wiz Khalifa in there, did I say that right or not? And that person still looks like the deadbeat dad who doesn't pay attention to his kid, you need to interrogate and problematize that narrative. Because, yeah, we've got this rapper in an Oreo commercial. But if we're still showing him on his phone, disconnected from his kid, that is just reinscribing that narrative that's been placed on black men.
Somebody else?
Well, we've had a great time here today. You are going to be given on your way out a prayer of lament, right? A prayer of lament. You want to explain it a little bit?
I'm going to read it to us, and then I would encourage you to take it when you leave. This is written by two bloggers that I know. One was my college roommate and her best friend. But I think that this encapsulates what we're getting at with the first step of racial reparations or racial reconciliation to lament. We lament the sins of racism and white supremacy that infiltrate our systems, structures, and hearts. We lament that when it comes to racism and white supremacy, white people elevate the voices and experiences of white people over the experiences and voices of people of color. We lament that white people often choose anger and defensiveness over self-reflection and repentance. We lament the tragic loss of human life and the fact that those in power routinely try to show us which lives they believe matter and which lives don't. We lament that thousands of people of color serve sentences for nonviolent crimes, while white people routinely accept mild reprimands for crimes like rape and murder. We lament that the exploitation of forgiveness as a means to gloss over outrage toward injustice. We lament that justice seldom reaches the most vulnerable. We lament the pain that has reached like twisted vines to cover every inch of this broken world, and we lament our part in it. We lament.
So today we encourage you to seek truth. Seek your truth. Be found in it. Listen. Be heard. Respond to the faithful call to justice. That's what we encourage you to do today. We love you, and we bless you.